Welcome to the Debrief Podcast with Matt Brown, the podcast where pastor and author Matt Brown debriefs your questions about Christianity and current issues shaping our culture. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey guys, welcome to Debrief. I'm going to be playing host today. Donna is out, and my good friend, Professor Jim Buchholz, is here today, professor of mathematics and physics, and we are going to answer all things beyond my level of intelligence. So here's what we do, Jim. We can I call you Jim, or do you want Dr. Buchholz, or just Jim. The mad scientist? What would you like?
Well, mad scientist works sometimes, but Jim's fine.
Okay, Jim. Thank you, Jim. So the reason I wanted to ask you what I call you, so what they do to me sometimes, that we do a cold open, so I don't know what the question is. So you're so brilliant. We're going to start off with a cold open today. So the first cold open question is, Jim, tell our audience what kind of student the young Matt Brown was when you first met him. How brilliant was the young Matt Brown?
Interestingly enough, I had you, I believe it was for college algebra.
Okay.
Is what I had, and this was, 25 years
ago?
Yeah,
we don't need to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting thing was, I still remember you, right? How many tens of thousands of students
I make an impression. Yes.
You made an impression. So I still remember the room we taught in.
Yeah.
I still remember we had green boards.
Yeah.
This has been the Blackboard day, except they were green.
Yes.
Right. And chalkboards.
Yeah. And
there was no such thing as PowerPoint slides or anything like that. And we did all the math on the board and stuff like that. And for whatever reason, I just said, Matt's going to be someone someday.
Oh.
I just knew it. And so I still remembered you. And probably from that class, I probably don't remember anyone else maybe. And it was it wasn't your stellar mathematical abilities. It was just you as an individual.
I was not going to be Elon Musk.
But you were going to be someone, and I could tell it. And I still remember that this day.
If I could go back and tell young Matt Brown any piece of advice, it would be learn to shut up. I just couldn't. I could not control this mouth. And so it's hilarious. I had no mathematical ability whatsoever, but you remember me.
But you brought up great questions.
Yes.
I can even, believe it or not, I can even remember you standing up and asking a question.
Wow. Yes.
So that's what a memory I have from that.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Question number 2. You ready for this one?
Yes.
Talk to me about your hair. Your hair. What is it about scientists? Is it that your IQ, once it goes over a certain level, it just goes wild? Your hair, you have like an Einstein look to you.
So my son says that to me all the time. One of my kids, I have several kids, and Matt says that to me all the time. Oh, you got that Einstein hair going. You got that Einstein hair going. And
I love it, by the way.
it's more, I don't know. I know why Einstein did it,
right.
But it's more in my case, and maybe somewhat laziness. Not that I shower every day and everything like that, but not getting in to get it cut again.
Yeah, I love it.
Just long periods of time go without getting cut.
I love it.
So he just ends up that way. Now, Einstein did on purpose. He intentionally raveled his hair because of the mad science thing you were talking about. When he became Einstein, what made him Einstein, the world started putting in front page newspapers around the world. New York Times, they were saying Einstein dethrones Newton. And he all of a sudden became just world famous and a household name. He was kind of thought of this crazy uncle. Yeah. And so he intentionally ruffled up his hair to take pictures when they came by to take them.
I love it. So here's an interesting fact. So I got to hang out with Rick Warren, and he has a personal library. This thing is a trip. So it's all shell encased in this bomb-proof, fireproof wing of his private building. And he has documentation from church history that would just blow your mind. But the thing that stood out to me the most in the entire library was an article in Time magazine. I think it's 1941 or 42, just after he came to America. He fled Germany. And he was talking about how impressed he was with Christians. And what he said in the article was, he said, I thought the universities in Germany would stand up to the Fuhrer, but they did not. He said, my profession, the academy, cowered at his strength. He said it was the church. The church stood up against him and spoke out against him and challenged him. And in the article, he talked about he had to reconsider, because before he was an atheist, and he had to reconsider, okay, maybe my area of thought is not as strong as possible. And I was so moved by the article. I asked Rick if I could take pictures of the Time magazine, because he has the actual magazine from 1941, and it was profound. And I think it's what we see in academia today. Just bowing down to this new gender politics, gender ideology, where everybody in science knows that gender's binary. It's male and female. I mean, for the most part, there are people that there is some question, extraordinarily small percentage of people. But I just thought it was so interesting that what caused him to really reconsider God, he said in the article, was the faith of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and some of these other just incredible German leaders that were like, no, this is wrong. And, and they died. They died for their faith. And so many people don't realize, but it was not just Jews in concentration camps, which was horrible because they were selected for their ethnicity, but it was conservative Christians who were targeted for their faith and the fact that they spoke out against Hitler in his rise to power. So I thought that was just a fantastic article that during a tragic time, oftentimes, we focus on when the church got it wrong, and the church has gotten it wrong many, many times. But that was a moment in Germany where he, as a brilliant man, took notice and said, they got it right, and maybe I need to reconsider my faith. So, well, thank you for those two questions. Those are the surprises. Nothing else will be a surprise.
I do have a very interesting point to make about Einstein and Hitler that very few people know. And whenever I bring this up with other physicists, I've yet to find another physicist that's ever heard this. Like, I just talking to him about it. Yeah. So maybe this going out wider, people start discussing it. Einstein tried to rename relativity.
Okay.
He wanted to call it invariant theory.
Okay.
And he couldn't do it. And he had a reason why he wanted to rename it invariant theory. Because relativity, and this happens a lot in science, something happens in science and people will equate it to other things. Okay. It'll pass over into theology, philosophy, ethics, and religion and stuff like that. And what happened was relative moralism took off in Germany and all around Europe because of relativity. And and because now time is relative and distances traveled is relative into your frame of reference.
Right.
What happened was moral relativism took off, and there was no longer absolute right and wrongs. And he was not that way. He said there are absolute right and wrongs. There, regardless of how you're born, your frame of reference in life, how you were born, and everything, it makes no difference. There are certain things that are right and certain things are wrong, regardless of your frame of reference. And people were using Einstein's relativity to say, no. Right and wrong depends on your frame of reference. And he really hated that. So he tried to name it invariant theory. Now, this is his theory, and he couldn't get the world to rename it, which is kind of weird. He then actually, now I found several references now at this point to prove he really did say that. There's more than one textbook that's now referring to this. But the biggest thing it led to was he was so frustrated that he believed moral relativism led to the rise of Hitler. And so he felt himself, now this is Walter Isaacson, who wrote a biography, written a lot of biographies, but big one on Einstein. And he says that Einstein himself had such a problem with moral relativism taking off through the universities. He says, had that not happened, Hitler never came to power.
Wow.
And he partially blamed himself. Einstein partially blamed himself because of relativity. He says there is a connection between that and Hitler's rise.
Yeah. And I just appreciate his authenticity, because many of the things that the church gets blamed for, and the church certainly has egg on its face and sin in our history, but many of these ideas come from science. I mean, not everything that Darwin argued for was beautiful and wonderful. If we're all apes and and some of us are more evolved than others, we can treat each other in a very, very different way, as opposed to Genesis 1:27 that says, regardless of your ethnicity, you are made in the image of God. Because Genesis 1:27 doesn't identify an ethnicity. It just, Adam is kind of the generic form for man, like, hey, you people. And so, all right. So, well, thank you for your honesty. And again, super excited to have you on the show. And thank you for my one class in college on algebra that allowed me to graduate and move forward and be the amazing human being that I am today. Thank you for not failing me. All right, let's talk briefly about the history of science in the church. Why have they always been at odds, or is this recent? What happened and why? Kind of give us a a Cliff Notes version. Do they still have Cliff Notes? They had Cliff Notes. That's how we cheated when I was in college. Now it's Google, but back in college when I was your student, we turned to Cliff Notes, so we didn't have to read everything. So give us the kind of the condensed version of why is this that there's this present tension between, people in our church who are, I'm more scientific, and then people who are like, well, I'm more faith, and they see these two kind of at each other's throats.
So it's rather a new experience, this conflict model that science and religion is at war with each other. Mm-hmm. And it was an intentional, it's kind of traced back to two books in the late 1800s. When I say recent, 1800s would still be recent compared to a couple thousand years ago and stuff like that, or even hundreds of years ago. Because if you go back a little over 1,000 years ago, you will find that who was doing science was the monotheistic religions. Right. It used to be very Islamic in the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century. That's where you get words like algebra, algorithm. Mm-hmm. Notice the al in there because these are Arabic words and so forth. And then somewhere around the 13th century, the Catholic Church just kind of took over science. Right. And it became a big deal. The Pope's summer palace is an observatory. And monks and priests were assigned scientific duties because they felt like, hey, we need to study God's work to really understand God. And in fact, Galileo, who's considered the father of modern day science, took Romans 1:12 and used it to say that that God wrote two books. It's called the two-book worldview. Okay. And God wrote the Bible, scripture, this is how you lead life, but he also wrote nature. And so you have the same author writing two books. You should study both, and you really won't know who God is without studying both. So he took it so far. Now I got to be careful. I can't do this, but he took it so far to say, hey, okay, if you don't read the Bible, that's a sin. You said earlier here, that's a problem. You're not reading the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. He said, if you're not doing science, that's a problem. Yeah. Because that's the other book that that you're not reading about God. And so he said, not doing science is a sin. Wow. So he was very strong, and you should do both these. They're both written by the same author, and you should do science. So and so we're talking about, that's 1600s. Before him was Copernicus in the 1400s. You had Johannes Kepler, Newton, Faraday, Mendel, Tesla.
I want to drive one of those. Different Tesla?
No, it's named after him. Nicholas Tesla, George Lemaitre, who invented Big Bang Theory, and modern day Francis Collins too. But it's been going on for years. So what happened was you had a couple of individuals, university professor and the first president of Cornell University, want to split the two. They did not like it. If you find, I claim they were both atheists that didn't like the power that the church had and how much the church was doing. No one will say they were theistic, but people say, well, they were agnostic. I think they were trying to be vague somewhat about their beliefs. But for the most part, they did not like how much influence or how that the church had on science, meaning how much the church was doing science, spending money on science, having their monks and priests do science and stuff. Yeah. And they wanted to separate it. So J.W. Draper and A.D. White both wrote books in the late 1800s. One was titled, Draper's book was titled The History of Conflict Between Religion and Science, and White's was titled A History of the Warfare of Science with Theology and Christendom. And these were both written in the late 1800s to try, and they were kind of, they were very cherry-picked in nature on purpose. And most historians do agree with that these were very biased books, trying to cherry pick these different things about, the church did this against science, the church did this against science, and not talking about all the different people who were highly religious that would even integrate science, religion all the time. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton, who was kind of the Einstein before Einstein, right? And Sir Isaac Newton believed, it didn't quite work out for him, but he believed that you could lead people to Christ through science, through physics. Right. And what a lot of people don't know is Isaac Newton wrote more about theology than he did science.
That's incredible.
And so he was a very religious individual. He ended up he ended up kind of didn't quite work with his trying to drive people towards Christianity, because it was more of his idea was this: look, if there was no God, if there was no creator,
Right.
then the world should be just haphazard. You shouldn't be able to write down equations. You shouldn't be able to explain things. It should be non-deterministic whatsoever. You shouldn't be able to explain why the planets go around. So he thought, if I come up showing you how the universe was constructed, and I can show you these mathematical equations that explain how the universe works, well, there had to be a person to set this up. And so there had to be a creator, right? So, but what it ended up promoting maybe more than anything was deism instead of theism. So even President Jefferson refers to Newton as one of the reasons why he was a deist, not a theist.
Yeah.
Because, okay, you showed me there's a creator, but where's the equations for prayer? Where's this interpersonal being, that you can pray to and answer your prayers and stuff like that? And,
right. Well, and the answer for that as Christians is Christ. So he is the mediator between us and this all-powerful God who is beyond. And even the Gospel of John says no one has seen God the Father but the Son. So how do we connect to this almighty force, power, unmoved mover for Aristotle? In John 1:1, the word is through Jesus. There's so many young people today who just feel like they can't be a person of faith and hold to science. How do you do that? Because you're both.
So I grew up not really even knowing or thinking there was a conflict.
Okay.
So I went to public school from first grade through my PhD.
Okay.
Everything.
So you didn't have professors that were anti-God when you were in school?
I did. Yes, no, I did in graduate schools where I started to run into them, amazingly so. And when I was working on my master's at Texas A&M, and A&M is supposed to be a fairly conservative public school, but I ran into some issues with and I was really horrible at debating science and religion. My first year as a grad student, we had one main office kind of where all the physics grad students were. And I was kind of trapped in the corner, and there was this really good atheist on this side of me and this really good atheist on this side. And what I mean by is, if you looked at the bookshelf, they both had Bibles on their bookshelf.
Wow.
They loved to get in arguments, and they loved to destroy you and try to use science to destroy the Bible.
Wow.
And so I would constantly, I guess, argue, debate with them like that. And I don't think I was good at it all. And my other friends who were Christians in the department say, why do you even debate with them? Shut up. You're going to get killed. It's 2-on-1 and they're ready for you. They've prepared everything, and they were really good at this. And I finally figured out, and my other Christian friend said, quit debating. I go, I lost, didn't I? I lost. I'm losing debates, aren't I? And then what happened was, before I left and came out here to finish my PhD at UCR, I kind of won the last debate. I asked my other friends, I go, oh, yeah. So I'm going to walk away a winner. Like, I'm not going to have any more debates with them. I think I won the last one. I'm going to walk away. But it took me a long time to figure out there was even this world of science and faith and science and religion, like it was in academia to have these discussions. I was just having these debates with other graduate students in physics who were atheists, right? And so I didn't know the terminology either. And I finally figured out what they thought about me.
Right.
And that's why I couldn't understand and respond to their questions. It's called God of the Gaps theory. And I don't really know very many Christian scientists who have that theory, but I realized that atheists think that. The God of the Gaps theory is this: that the only reason why you or I believe in God, or the only reason why a scientist believes in God, is because there's unanswered questions of science.
Right.
Science can't explain this yet, so you need a God. As soon as science can explain everything in nature, there's no need for a God. I've never thought that, but it took me forever to figure out that's what they were saying.
Okay.
And all their arguments, they were trying to show, let's see, once we find the Higgs particle, which is now found. I can still remember one debate with them saying, once we find the top quark, the bottom quark, and the Higgs particle, it's all over with. Now we have found all of them. Physics is done. The world's over with. No need for a God.
Right.
And that was assuming that I believe in God because there are some questions science hasn't answered yet. I'm like, that isn't why I believe in God. But I didn't really grasp that God of the Gaps theory.
Yeah, and you're old enough to kind of see the pendulum swinging back where scientists, I think the majority were anti-God, but now they're kind of scratching their heads going with the with the breaking down of the DNA sequence and stuff like that, where they're seeing code and they're kind of going, okay, wait a minute. This certainly looks like it's been programmed by, and they might not use the word God, but some form of higher intelligence. Are you seeing that or no?
So, I mean, I've seen that in my area of astrophysics with Big Bang theory and so forth. I've seen that, and in genetics, I'm really interested in genetics, by the way.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about more of that later because I think there's an audience question that involves some ideas I had about genetics. So I've actually got some money from the Human Genome Project just to study, I'm a physicist, not a geneticist, but I wanted to get educated on it and bring some of it back. And I brought what I learned about genetics back into my class, my science and faith classes too. But yes, there's a thing called the Anthropic principle. It basically means what are all the things in nature that have to be extremely finely tuned for us to be here. Mm-hmm. Some of these things, for example, if the neutron is slightly more massive than the proton, you reverse it and no universe, essentially. Wow. When people first started coming up with all these different things that you slightly like, if gravity was slightly weaker, we would have expanded and stars would never form. It was slightly stronger, the universe would have already collapsed on itself. The universe wouldn't be here. There was about 29 when this kind of became very popular decades ago. It's like these 29 different principles. Now, what are the odds that these are all this finely tuned?
Right.
And the odds aren't 1 in a million, 1 in a billion, 1 in a trillion. They're 1 in a trillion. They're like ridiculous odds. Yeah. And if you talk to statisticians at some point, it's like we just say there's no chance of this happening. And this is where infinity comes in. Mm-hmm. So where an atheist comes in, and by the way, there's more than 29 things. There's people have come up with over 100. There's over 100 different variables in nature, including genetic stuff like this, that either humans wouldn't be here or even the universe wouldn't be here if just one of these goes wrong. So we're super fine-tuned. The odds that we're here are so astronomical that it's hard to believe we're here. It's much easier to believe in a creator than not to believe in a creator because the odds are just against it being a fluke.
Right.
And so what was I?
I don't know. You're the genius.
Anyway, so this principle is basically the issue that are you infinity? That's what I'm talking about. Infinity. So what you have is, but if you give here's what you get. If you give an infinite number of attempts, the probability is 1 we're here. That's the argument of the atheistic philosophers of science of earth. If the universe has an infinite number of attempts, the problem is with that, and I bring up a lot of time with physicists, is there's no such thing as infinity. Infinity is not a real number. It's a construct. It's a concept. It doesn't exist. But yet with these multiverse theories out there, there's an infinite number of universes. There's an infinite number of Matt Browns out there. There's an infinite number of Jim
we all
Buchholz.
know there can only be one.
Yeah.
Except for the MMA fighter who knocked out his opponent this weekend, I got to say. Did you guys see that Matt Brown one? Yeah, he's been losing. So it's been tough. Every time he gets knocked out, everyone texts me like it's me. So sorry. But there is an MMA fighter named Matt Brown.
That's great. So, and the problem is you need infinity to get a lot of these theories to work. And you will have, and the people that mostly will say things against infinities are mathematicians, not physicists. It's like the physicists love it. And you'll have some famous mathematicians who'll get, quit using infinity so much.
Right.
You're treating infinity like it really exists.
Yeah.
And I don't believe there's an infinite number of anything, but infinities are often needed to get over this idea that to work around it's highly unlikely we're here without a creator.
What I say this, to work around the mathematical improbability. Right. So what you have to do is throw out math, because that's what infinity is, right? So math is gone because we have this number that goes on forever. So you're nodding.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So infinity is not on the real number.
Like that was my best shot at brilliance.
Yeah, no, infinity is not on.
I'm looking for affirmation. Yeah. Everyone in the room is laughing. Okay, so I'm kind of jumping around. Sorry. This is, my ADD. I can't help it. It's a real condition. People don't believe it, but it is. So with that being said, let's dialogue between science and faith, which we've done a little bit. What are the different viewpoints?
So Ian Barber came up with a great kind of breaking it down in 4 categories. Some people have broke down to more, but I don't think you actually need to. And I was being interviewed about this after I did create this course called Science and Faith. I won a Templeton grant between Jeff Cate, who's a theologian at Cal Baptist, and I, and we put this together. And we got interviewed by the Press Enterprise. And I remember talking about this to her. And the first model is the conflict model, right? And the conflict model basically says that they are in total contrast to each other. One's right, one's wrong. They can't work together at all. There's just nothing. One's right, one's wrong. And then you have the independence model. And the one right, one wrong would be like Carl Sagan, if you can remember Carl Sagan, and stuff like that. So, or Richard Dawkins,
right?
They'd be conflict model. Independence model. Stephen Jay Gould, who was an atheist, but he believed in the independence model. He goes, no, they're both valuable. Religion and science both valuable, but they have their own domains.
Right.
There are questions that science should answer, not religion, and there's questions that religions answer, not science. Keep them in their separate domains. Now, Dawkins and Carl Sagan, they would not even agree with that.
Wow.
They would say, no. They're like, if you ask a question that science can't answer, that's a nonsensical question. That question has no meaning. That's like a conflict model person. Okay. And then dialogue is where people like Francis Collins comes in, who was head of the Human Genome Project and also the head of the National Institutes of Health. And
he's a Christian.
And he's a Christian, yes. And became a Christian while working on his PhD in biology in grad school. Yeah. And so dialogue's more of, okay, and this will lead into one of the questions that a student, or excuse me, not a student.
We're all students
audience,
when you're on the show.
Yes, an audience member asked, whatever. But he says, we have to have dialogue. They both can do it, but they have to come together and discuss things. Right. And he's a geneticist, remember. So this leads into later on one of your audience questions here. But it's like we have to have this discussion. We have to have a discussion about science can do this. Should we do this? So there has to be constant dialogue going on and so he believes that theologians, like yourself, should study science so that you know how to interact. So if there's something genetics coming on, you should know something about genetics so you know how to help answer questions. Should we do this just because we can do this? Right. Is a big topic in his area. So that's dialogue. And then integrations like Hugh Ross, the founder of Reasons to Believe, former atheist, also an astrophysicist that's now a pastor and runs this, and integrations where he just looks in the Bible and finds science in the Bible. Wow. Like he's like, here, and he'll go, here's Big Bang Theory right here, in the Bible. And he'll give you scripture where it talks about Big Bang Theory. And so that's an integrationist. I would say most of the people I run across that are Christians who are scientists tend to be the dialogue model. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think we all get smarter through dialogue. Have you read The Genesis Enigma? Have you read that?
I haven't.
Yeah. So that was an interesting book. I just finished that maybe last year. And so for those who don't know what that is, it's an evolutionary, what would you call them? Creation, not evolutionary creation. That's 2 different words. An evolutionary scientist looking at Genesis 1 from the organizational process of evolution, his understanding of how the planets, the species, and everything was created. And it was an interesting book. I don't know that I bought everything that he said, but it was interesting. And so his whole point was, how on earth did Genesis 1 get so close to what evolutionary people think actually happened? So it's an interesting book. It's a long book. You can, if you are tired of listening to this show, you can listen to that for yourself. So those are the 4 points. So which one do you ascribe to? I'm going to guess integration.
So I'm somewhere between dialogue and integration. Okay. I've talked to Hugh about this, and I'm saying, okay, you publish stuff all the time saying that, this was already in the Bible. We discovered this in science. And I go, well, what happens when we find out, and this happens, we made a mistake in science. Right. And now you've equated it to a verse in the Bible, and then we find out that was a mistake. Yeah. Did you just say that verse in there? Yeah. The Bible's a mistake. And I say, and so I have we've had discussions about this, and I gave him some examples. I don't want to give the examples. He's not here to defend himself. And I've given examples where I don't like doing. I don't like finding science in the Bible. I have more of a 2-book worldview of. I would say, I don't know that even Galileo would be an integrationist. He would be somewhere between a dialogue integrationist. In other words, there's 2 separate books here. Let's read them both.
Yeah, I can give you an example of where I think that happened, and we can go a long time ago. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, the earth was null and void. So that's the translation in most English Bibles. So Genesis 1:1 is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So Genesis 1:2 is the Holy Spirit is hovering above the darkness, and the earth is null and void. I don't have my Bible in front of me, so if I get that off just a little bit. But null and void is a translation of the Hebrew word tohu wabohu. And so tohu wabohu, the only other place that word is used is in the book of Jeremiah. And so there's this professor, Dr. Selhammer, who says the best way to interpret the Bible is from the Bible. And so in Jeremiah, it means wild. It does not mean null and void, empty, without form. It means wild. His argument is the earth was not suitable for man. So when God is acting in creation in Genesis 1, his argument is that the earth already exists, but it is not yet suitable for man. And so Genesis chapter 1 is all, the 7 days of creation where God is transforming and changing the earth. That's his argument. But the Greeks believed in the fact that their science, that the earth was null and void. And so that's an example of where Greek science and understanding was interpreted into the Bible. And then now that that's changed, that verse is a problem because they did exactly what you're saying. Their science was proved to be wrong, but now we're stuck with this translation for thousands of years based upon Greek, Greco-Roman scientific understanding of the formation of the world. And so that's a great example where we have to be really, really careful that we don't try to argue for the current understanding of science in the Bible because science is constantly changing. And so Selhammer's argument is that the Word of God remains the same. And so it should be understood separate from itself. And so his daughter went to MIT, and he's passed now, but he was the leading Hebrew scholar in the world, one of the top 5, 6 Hebrew scholars in the world. And his daughter went to MIT. And so he wrote a book called Genesis Unpacked. Or can you guys look that up for me? Unbound. There we go. Because his daughter kind of lost her faith a little bit at MIT. She's like, Dad, what's going on here? And so he wrote that book. It's out of print. I think I paid $250 for my copy, and it's like a paperback. I think it's available on Amazon. Okay. So it's available again. So it's a great, great book for those who want to learn. And so that's interesting. I agree. I think maybe dialogue is better. We just got to be so careful because like science is constantly growing and understanding and changing because it's a pursuit of the unknown, and technology is changing and driving that. I mean, we're going to see with AI, right? The abilities for these computers to work formulations all night without rest. I mean, you probably only sleep like what, an hour a night, but
you know what? I crashed yesterday.
That's good.
and then I got very little sleep later.
Did you fall asleep on your computer?
I fell asleep. No, I fell asleep on bed. I was doing laundry, and I put my sheets in there. And when I'm waiting for the sheets to dry, but I just kind of lay down the bed anyway.
Yeah.
And there's no sheets there. And 3.5 hours. Wake up later. It's like, it's 3.5 hours. Oh my gosh. Just
I wouldn't think that a scientist would have an actual bed, right? Just an office chair.
Yeah. Couch maybe.
Bro, our lives are at stake. We need you to be working.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Next one. Here's a big one. The Big Bang. The Big Bang has been a dividing point for a long time. Dr. Buchholz, you're an astrophysicist. I love saying that. What is Matt Brown? Not an astrophysicist. What are the misconceptions?
But you are a student of an astrophysicist.
Yes. Oh man, you are my favorite. What are the misconceptions of what it is, and how has it or was it interpreted by scientists?
So the interesting thing is that I would say the general public, for the most part, and maybe even pastors around the world have maybe gotten this kind of backwards. Here's what most of my students think. Let me say what they think and it isn't. We're in this room and I have a firecracker, right?
Yeah.
And I light the firecracker and it blows up and pieces fly through the room and they're flying through everywhere, right?
Right.
And a lot of people don't like that and go, oh God, just what there's, and I've heard statements from different ministers and so forth, like, what, no need for God, just this explosion and particles just fly through the universe. That is actually not Big Bang Theory.
Okay.
Big Bang Theory is there was no universe. There was no space. There was no time. And the bang, which in science terms, you'll say the T=0 event, the beginning of time, was the beginning of space and time. So space and time was created in an instant. Like, boom, there was no space and time, and now it's here. And instead of thinking of galaxies as flying through space, they're being drugged by space. What's expanding is space and time itself and pulling the galaxies apart. So I brought my whiteboard if you want.
Yeah.
If you want me to draw.
Yes. Well, our listeners in the car are going to struggle, but
listeners in the car are going to
I will be enlightened.
I don't know if you can see this or. All right. No, okay. So I'm just going to kind of draw a balloon here and put dots on a balloon. Okay. So here's dots on a balloon. All right. And there's dots on a balloon. Are we in? All right. So what happens is, here's Big Bang Theory. So later on, if you keep blowing that balloon up, it's expanding.
Right.
You think of the surface of the balloon as space-time. I know that's only 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
And space-time's 4 dimensions, 3 spatial plus 1 time. But so I can't draw all 4 dimensions, right? And I can't even visualize 4 dimensions.
Okay.
Unless you put something in my T, I'm not going to be able to do it.
We did actually.
Okay. Well, maybe I can visualize it now. All right. So as this expands, well, what's going to happen to those dots?
They're going to get pulled.
They're going to get pulled apart. They're going to get pulled further and further apart, and you're going to get these dots going to be further apart. So it doesn't make a difference. So the idea is that the balloon surface is space-time, and these dots are like galaxies.
Okay.
And as you blow the balloon up, you're pulling the galaxies apart. All right? They're being pulled apart. So the galaxies aren't flying through space. They're being pulled by space-time. And so space just keeps expanding. Space-time just keeps expanding. Now, let's say this is our galaxy. There's the Milky Way. Well, all these dots are moving away from you, right? Well, let's say you lived in this galaxy. Still, all the dots are moving away from you. There is no center to the universe. You would say, well, but yes, because the center is in the middle of the balloon. Well, the balloon's not part of the universe. So in Big Bang Theory, there's no center of the universe. No matter where you live, if you look over great enough distances, everything's going to be moving away from you. So no matter where you go, everything's being pulled away, right? So now the idea is, if you get this expansion rate, and this is what the Hubble Space Telescope's named after. One of the things he's famous for is getting this expansion rate and plotting a graph to get this expansion rate. If you take this expansion rate and you see how big it is today,
right,
you can run the movie backwards to see when it was a singular point and there was no space and time. In other words, if you see something, it's like this. If something's this big today, right? What was here, then it was here, then it was here, then it was here, right? And you can measure the expansion rate, then you should be able to run the movie backwards and see when it started. So when you hear people say that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, that's what we're doing. It literally comes from the Hubble graph, which measures this rate of expansion, assuming it's approximately the same throughout time. That's an approximation. You run it out like this, and you just run the movie backwards and go,
yep,
when there was nothing. And so the bang is the creation of it. So when it first came out, by the way, the person that pointed, speaking of this supposed war between science and faith,
right,
the person that first came up with this was a priest, a Belgian priest.
Wow.
Okay. Lemaitre. And he came up, his theory was this. He came up with Big Bang Theory. Now, he didn't have the name Big Bang Theory, but he came up with this idea that there should have been no space and time, just a point, whatever a point is. And in mathematics, we don't define what a point is.
Okay.
Don't you know what it is?
Well, I rarely have a point, so therefore I'm a mathematician.
There you go. And so all of a sudden, bang,
right,
this expanded. And so the issue was, and so a lot of people thought that, this Big Bang Theory, what need is there for God? Well, the answer was, it was more the theistic people that fell in line with liking Big Bang Theory in the beginning than the atheistic people, because it's implying a beginning to the universe. Most people, including Einstein, and wanted the universe to always have been here. They want the universe always to have been here. They don't want a beginning. And the person who coined the term Big Bang Theory was Fred Hoyle. Fred Hoyle was an astrophysicist that did not believe in the Big Bang Theory. And so Lemaitre came up with this idea in the late 1920s. And by I think it was in 1949 on a BBC show, on a radio show, that Fred Hoyle comes up and just says the word Big Bang.
Okay.
And he said it despairingly or discardingly. He goes, this Big Bang, right?
Right.
And it caught on. And he was actually kind of making fun of it because he didn't believe in it. He believed in steady state theory, which is the universe has always been here, pretty much the way it looks today. He did not want a beginning at a time. Now, the thing I really appreciate about Fred Hoyle is that he said he did, and it's hard to get a lot of people to agree with this, but he actually did openly say one of the major reasons why I don't like Big Bang Theory is because I'm an atheist. He said, because if you can convince me there was a bang, then I would have to believe that that's a creation event. He admitted that's a creation event. Yeah. I would have to believe in a creator then. And since I'm an atheist, I don't believe this.
Right.
So to his dying days, he still was writing books called Semi-Steady State Theory.
Yeah.
And this is long after people gave up on a steady state theory. They gave up on this, and they basically, but even Hawkins, go more modern day with Hawkins, who just passed away a couple years ago. Hawking himself did occasionally say, I don't like Big Bang Theory. And you think, well, Hawking didn't like Big Bang Theory. He didn't, and while you can attribute some of his comments, he was a little careful. He was more careful than, he was not as open as Fred Hoyle was about, I'm an atheist, Big Bang Theory's got to be wrong, because if it were right, there's a God. He was more like that. Hawking wasn't quite as open as that, but he did make statements like, if I can remove the bang from Big Bang, what need is there for a God? So he was like, he wanted to move that. So the way he worked on using imaginary time. So he added an imaginary time direction, a dimension, and tried to get rid of the bang. Now, why would you do that? Why would you try to get it? What's your motive? And I argue my argument is, and he's not here to defend himself, so I'm sorry about that. But it's his worldview. His worldview is, I got to do something to get rid of God.
Yeah.
To have it so that people quit interpreting this bang as a creator.
Do you think that, and you're a scientist, so you can't speak for everyone. Do you think that there's an intellectual arrogance, and they can't see that in some way they're making themselves be God? Do you think that that's true at all? I mean, why this intense need for there not to be something smarter than them that's organizing the universe?
So,
I mean, I know this is not on the questions.
No, I know. What I think is that I'm one of a few people that think your worldview comes before your philosophies.
Okay.
That you basically build a worldview, and then when you philosophize about things, whether it's science or whatever, and by the way, prior to about the 17th century, the words science and scientist didn't exist. Scientist is a new word. It used to be philosopher of nature.
Oh,
like Newton was a philosopher of nature. People were philosophers of nature. Okay. So philosophy was very heavily tied to it. And but I think worldview comes first. I think as soon as you come out of the womb, mom is God kind of thing. You're like, and you've got this, And so I think you start to develop right away these certain beliefs, right? And so I often wonder, how do you take someone who's an atheist as an adult and convince them to change their worldview? Because you got to change your worldview.
Right.
You may not even have to change your philosophy of how you do things or study study science, but you got to change your worldview.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So when Jesus, in our English Bibles, when you see the word repent, the Greek word is metaneo, which is a word that means the total change of one's thought. So it's a change of the way that you think and see the world and experience it around you. But that's what leads to salvation. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And so what I would say is, I think we can do our best to argue, but ultimately it's the Holy Spirit that can change a person. And so what we need to do is not be jerks, be understanding, be you know who Dallas Willard was?
Yes.
So he was a professor at USC in philosophy. The entire department's atheist, anti-Christian. And I asked him, I said, how do you exist in such an anti-Christian environment? And he said, I'm excellent at what I do.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing is, the world doesn't care what you believe as long as you're excellent at what you do. And he said, I work hard to be an excellent philosopher. And so there's a place for me here. And so that's what I would say to everybody out there that's so overwhelmed with our worldview, losing, because it's losing, is be excellent at what you do, have integrity, be sharp, work hard, earn the respect of your peers. And I think that, I mean, when we're in this series called She, Her, and so I think we'll be done with this by the time the show airs. But my favorite thing is when we talked about the women who traveled with Jesus, one of the women, Joanna, was the household manager of Herod. She was an influential woman. She did. And so what did Jesus? Jesus, because by definition, he was excellent at what he did, he drew Nicodemus. He drew Joseph of Arimathea. He drew Joanna, the household manager of Herod. People saw in him a moral, intellectual, and emotional excellence that was so appealing, they were willing to work around that unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, right? Those are the challenging teachings. His excellence was able to attract people beyond that. And I'm not saying you're Jesus or I'm Jesus, but I'm saying Jesus is glorified when we're excellent at what we do. And what I've seen in the Christian world oftentimes is a laziness that's perpetuated by, well, God's in charge. And I say this all the time to Christians who say that to me. I say, well, what does he put you in charge of? One of my favorite verses in the Psalms is the heavens are the Lord and the earth has been given to us. I mean, okay. So life is what, let me give you the dumbed down version. Life is what you make it. So my friend Tim Timberlake says this, that we are born looking like our parents. We die looking like our decisions. I mean, it's a powerful, and I'm only going to quote him once, and from now on, I'm going to say, I've always said. So, no, I mean, every time he says that, it's so profound, but we need to have a change because our worldview is so often wrong. And the best way to, like I love Melody's. Did you get to hear Melody's sermon this weekend?
Yes.
For Mother's Day?
Yeah.
I think the most profound point is when she talked about how her father-in-law came to Christ. His wife led him to Christ. He didn't want a pastor. He didn't want a priest.
Yeah.
He wanted his wife because she had lived a life of moral excellence. And when he was faced with eternity, he knew that she was the real deal and she led him to faith in Christ. And so what I would say is, we have so many teachers that are so worried about, all this junk that they don't believe in that they have to teach. And I don't mean professors. I mean, it's probably at your level, but it's more at the, there's more control over academia at the lower levels than there is. I mean, you guys are supposed to be free to do things. And I'm not saying there isn't pressure in the collegiate ranks, but what do? It's be excellent at your craft, be the best teacher. And then in that, that makes people curious. Why are you the way that you are? And you can draw people, because at the end of the day, we're not going to save the world, but we can save individual people in the world. And that's what I'm trying to do is do that. So that's fantastic. All right. Last question. How do scientists know what they know? I don't even know what this question means. How is it the same or different than theologians? Axioms, postulates, and faith. How do they? I mean, because you said science is always changing. So how do you know?
So Euclid back in 300 BC wrote the books called Elements. 13 books called Elements.
Yeah,
and if how some people say, well, what book should I read? If you had a top 10 list, other than the Bible, I mean, Bible be number one, maybe Euclid's Element first, number
I've never
two.
read it. All right,
and at first you're gonna be like, what? And what he did is something that I don't think can be done again. He basically said, this is the way we think. There's no other way. And this is now 2,300 years ago, and people are going like, yeah, that's the way we think.
Wow. Okay.
And so the idea is, he set up these axioms. Axioms are statements that you believe to be true, self-evident, right? You've heard that word before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you have no proof for them.
Yeah. Okay.
And you have to do that.
Right.
You have to come up with statements. Okay. Postulate, physicists, we like to use the word postulate because if it's a statement you believe to be true, but you can't prove it.
Right.
And it has to do with nature, then I kind of like to use postulates.
Right.
Mathematicians kind of interchange those. I like to keep them separate. So they're both things you believe to be true that can't prove. Like there's like 5 major postulates of quantum mechanics. So think about quantum mechanics is dominating, right? Quantum computers and everything. Right. And yet there's 5 things we know. What we say, hey, we're never going to be able to prove this. We just believe them to be true.
Okay.
So you have to set up things, but then you have things called like undefined terms.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have undefined terms. Like in math, the word point, we talked about it, there's no definition for point.
Mm.
There's no definition for line. There's no definition for set.
Mm.
So we have these different things. The reason why is if you define point, you have to define it in terms of another word.
Right.
And then you have to find that word in terms of another. And yet every language is circular. You get back to point again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're trying to define set, the word set, S-E-T, and you go, well, it's a collection of. Well, I'll define the word collection. Well, a collection's a group of. And I'll define group. Well, a group's like, a group's a set of. And then all of a sudden you're back to set.
Right.
So you have to have places, both things you believe to be true about the universe,
right.
postulates,
mm-hmm.
and words you aren't going to define.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go from there. So an axiom or postulate, something you believe to be true about nature. Well, how would you define faith?
Wow.
Faith's the same thing.
Yeah.
In theological terms, you have faith that this is true, or that you have faith that God exists. You have faith that, in fact, if I would make God an undefined term,
mm-hmm.
like because any definition of God falls short.
Right. Amen.
So I'm going to make God an undefined term. So when someone asks me, well, who is God? I go, but it does, just because the words point and line and set aren't defined in mathematics, they still get understanding in the context they're used. Mm-hmm. So they're still useful.
Right.
So there's these 10 major postulates, or 5 axioms, 5 postulates, the way he called them, that the 10th one that Euclid set up, people for just centuries and centuries tried to prove it wasn't a postulate. And the way you do that is if you can take any previous postulates and do a theorem to prove this postulate. It wasn't a postulate because you just proved it.
Yeah.
But you can never get down to zero.
Right.
So what you try to do is scientists try to find the fewest number of things that we say we aren't going to prove and prove everything else in terms of that.
Okay.
And so faith and axioms are essentially the same thing.
Yeah. Have you ever had a conflict between what you know as a scientist and your faith in God? Has there ever been a conflict for you? I know that's not on the list. I just threw that out there.
So
and feel free to answer whatever you want to answer.
Yeah,
or not.
My real there's things in the Old Testament that bother me.
Yeah.
I hate reading this, and you shall die.
Yeah.
I hate reading that stuff, and I sat down with a Jewish student one time. We wanted to have lunch. We sat down, we talked about it and everything. And I still remember him saying to me, he goes, you Christians lightened God up. You made God more loving and happy. You just lightened him up, And I kind of understand what he's saying, and I wonder how I would view the Testament if I only believe in the Old Testament, not the New Testament, I mean, I have to read both, or I'm like, really? That's just so horrible.
Right.
Things seem so horrible. So many things in the Old Testament are. So I struggle with Old Testament things.
No, absolutely. That's a whole nother show where we can talk about the Old Testament. All right, man. So thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to do some audience questions, but if there's anybody out there, any of our listeners that anywhere near Hunter Park, because we're going to do your class in Hunter Park, right?
Yeah.
So the Hunter Park campus is our largest campus in Riverside, California. And so I don't think there's going to be an online option. So I apologize to our listeners because we have listeners from literally all over the world that listen. So thank you for your faithfulness. But he's going to be teaching a class exploring, what would you call it? Science and faith?
Science and faith.
Science and faith. So if this is something you're curious about, this is a place where you have questions. If you just want to connect with people at the Hunter Park campus, this is a great place to start. We're going to announce this in the show notes. It starts June 12th. This show is going to air June 1st. How long do you think the class is going to go for? How many weeks are you guys going to go?
So I'm just figuring, we'll try like 6 or 7 weeks. I've written kind of a booklet. We maybe can go off that about 7 chapters. And so we can kind of go over that and kind of, I don't want to say the word assignments.
Yeah.
But I mean, so this is what we're going to talk about.
Is this a safe place for somebody who has real questions?
Yeah. So it needs to be a safe place. It absolutely has to be a safe place.
And so let me explain what I mean by that is at the end, you can come to this class and not agree with what we believe or think at Sandals Church, and you will be loved, accepted, and we'll do the best that we can to answer your question. So that's what I mean by safe. Now, if you come and you're a total jerk or you protest or something, that's a different issue. Is we don't want you to be an obstructionist to learning, but if you want to be a participant, man. I believe that your questions, just like on this show, your questions make the show better. I think tough questions will make the class better. So it's going to start June 12th at Hunter Park. I would encourage you to be a part of that. There will not be childcare, so please don't ask. Our kids ministry will murder me because we are struggling getting people to come back and work with kids once again. This last weekend we had Mother's Day, and there must have been just thousands upon thousands of children running around who were all jacked up because mama didn't have to make breakfast, so they came with donuts and soda pop. And basically we had 2,000 crackheads, 0 to 6th grade this weekend. And hopefully not all of our teachers didn't quit. Man, when I was a soccer coach, man, the parents used to show up and their kid with a donut and a big gulp. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are you handing your child off to me with, this horrible methamphetamine that you've just given your child? All right. So audience questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So I did not come up with these questions. These are our audience members, and they are all brilliant because they follow the show. They make the show better. So this comes from Instagram. My question is around ethics. Just because we can, does that mean we should? Man, that is a great question. For example, creating life, such as in the case of infertility treatments, or actions like modifying or customizing genes to remove undesirable traits or conditions. Would love some insight on this topic, and I am guessing this has no name behind it. You couldn't find the name, so that may mean the staff made this up just to watch me squirm. Let's just start off before we get into the specifics. Let's just talk about, just because we can, does that mean that we should? I think that's what Elon Musk is sounding the alarm on. I mean, he is saying AI is a problem, that this is going to create unwanted consequences. And so here's the thing is, I think the world, people may not like his politics, but they do appreciate his brilliance. And so when you have one of the most brilliant people saying, this is a problem, and so, we were talking about the end times, was it 2 episodes ago? And they said, what is your philosophy on the end time? And I said, every pastor who's ever answered this question has been wrong in the history of church. Anyone. So, and then I gave my 2 cents. And so my 2 cents is that, the number 666 could be John's interpretation of coding. So I think it would be interesting that God created us in his image, and then we create AI in our image, but it reflects our brokenness and our fallenness, and it kills us all. And so, the abomination of desolation in Revelation could be some hybrid, half human, altered human, AI version of human. I mean, because John doesn't have a category for that. So that's my 2 cents. Everybody sleep tight. I know I've scared everyone to death, but I think that's a great example where someone who, I don't think Elon Musk is a Christian, but he's saying we need to pump the brakes. Just because we can doesn't mean that we shouldn't. And Einstein shared some of those concerns with the nuclear bomb, right? He was like, this is power that we can't control. And we all have to live with this scary tension now, because there's a guy named Putin that has a couple of these. I think he has 2 or 3 of these bombs, maybe 10,000, but who's counting? What do you think about that? I mean, where is the moral brakes for scientists?
Well, see, this is where, and we talked about Francis Collins earlier. So Francis Collins, who is on the dialogue model issue, and he says, and I've met him a few times. We're both fellows of ASA, which is the American Scientific Affiliation. It's a group of scientists who are Christians in North America, and he has said, I've heard him say, scientists are the last people who should be making these ethical decisions. Right. Okay. So, and just to remind you, so he was the director of the Human Genome Project. Right. Right. And then he became the director of the National Institutes of Health under 3 administrations. Mm-hmm. No one's even done it under 2. So he's very, very popular person. It's a presidential appointment. He got appointed by Obama, then he got appointed by Trump, then he got appointed by Biden, and then he retired December this last year. So, but he says we should be the last people making these decisions. Yeah. And I'll give you a good example. I for years would tell my students, man, it's a good thing I'm a Christian because I have some brilliant genetic experiments I would like to do. Yeah. And I said, if we really want to learn how much nature and how much nurture is, how much of who you are is genetics and how much is nurturing your environment you're in. It's called nature versus nurture. Mm-hmm. What we really should be doing is separating all twins at birth in the United States. Get all twins and just separate them at birth, and don't even let the kids know that they have a twin, and just separate. And that would make a great experiment.
Okay.
That would make a fantastic experiment. We really would learn a lot.
Okay,
So
I was really nervous with where you're going with that, but I think that's okay. I thought you were going to say like put one in a cell or something. I was like, man, maybe I need to talk to Cal Baptist. You may have lost it. No, that was good.
But here's the funny thing. So I would tell this story for years. My students go, but of course that's unethical, right? Right. But it's unethical. But if I weren't a Christian, I'd be like, I want to do this. I want to do this. Right. What's the consequence? Well, there's no life after death. Who cares? This is good science, right? It ends up, we find out a few years ago, this has been done.
Oh, wow.
And you should see this documentary called 3 Identical Strangers.
Wow. Okay,
and you got to see 3 Identical Strangers. And it was about these triplets that were separated at birth by scientists at the orphanage. They were working with, I believe it was in New York, an orphanage in New York.
Okay.
And they were giving adoptions without telling people adopt them. They would tell them this is just one child.
Wow.
This is just one child. And they split them up. And by the time they were 19, they found each other.
Wow.
They just came across each other, and then the parents start saying, like, I wonder. They thought scientists followed them throughout their lives, would come and do visits, but they thought it was like part of the adoption thing. We need to make sure the child's still being taken. Right. They would ask all these questions. They were scientists showing up, trying to see, if we put this person in this environment, or this person in this environment, and they all have the same genes, but we put them in this environment, this environment, this environment, how are they different? And it was a scientific project, and it really was done. And and when I found out that actually happened, I was like, oh my gosh, there are mad scientists out there.
Yes. Yeah.
And evidently it wasn't just these 3. It was an ongoing thing. And these individuals, only 2 of the brothers are alive now. One committed suicide. Don't mean to ruin the documentary for you. But evidently it was done several times through this particular.
Yeah, that's terrible. Thanks for sharing. So here's what I would say is I think for when I was growing up and coming up, and it's one of the reasons I no longer consider myself liberal. I would consider myself liberal for very years, but my liberal friends would say, keep your conscience and your morals out of the voting booth. And I was like, and what I realized is, no, that's part of how as Christians we're salt and light, is we need to have a voice. I don't think we need to be in control. The church historically has not done real well when we're in charge. And Jesus never called us to be in charge, but he does call us to be the salt and light. And so we do need to speak into conscience. And so even if, in the abortion, I think debate until Jesus comes, and the legality of it is going to sway with each generation, I think the church always needs to consistently speak not to the law, but to the moral truth of what a child is. And that's where I say, I think we speak into that, just because you can end a life, what the church says is, should you? And that's where I think our job is to speak into that. And, there's going to be some people, you want me to speak on the legality, and what I want to speak to as salt and light is the morality. And that's where I think the church, we can lose sight. I think we actually lose some of our moral integrity when we try to control. When we try to control society, I think that we need to be seen as a place where people can come for moral truth and guidance, because science does not provide it. So this question, such as on infertility treatments, here's what I've done, because I've had people who come to me and ask this very question. And what I say is, you have the Holy Spirit inside you. I'm going to speak to, like, if they were going to end a life, but infertility actually creates another challenge, which is the creation of life. And so what do you do with eggs that are frozen, that are have been, what do they call it when they put the egg and the sperm together? Fertilized. Thank you. What do you do with these fertilized eggs? I mean, it creates a huge problem. And I've watched families go through that, because, they might get 10 fertilized eggs or 12 fertilized eggs, and by the grace of God, the first time it worked, or they have kids, but what do you do with that? And so that's the problem, is oftentimes science creates problems. Here's another huge problem, is science can save the life of a child that otherwise would have died at birth. And then you have all of these struggles and challenges. And, I've seen it with families. Science can keep a family member after an accident alive. What kind of life is it? Well, without science, we wouldn't face that dilemma. And so, what I try to guide families, because nobody at the shock of an accident, nobody wants to lose a family member. But it may no longer, outside of a miracle of God, be the family member that you want alive, because they've been destroyed either through, something to the brain or in that effect. And that is so heart-wrenching, because science can keep people alive that under normal circumstances would have and should have died. So it's a huge, huge problem medically, scientifically, I think ethically. And we all have to at some point say, okay, when is it enough? Because, your desire for a child can become God. Like that can become the thing that, I think it's okay to want children, but to say I can't live and not be a mom, or I can't live and not be a dad, because then you're going to make decisions and choices, and I'm not saying this for any of our listeners, but have led people historically to snatching kids at hospitals and, parks and stuff like that. I mean, when you can't live without that, you do crazy things. And so we have to be very, very careful. And this is why I would say we need good community that sees us, loves us. And I think it's human nature to say, I can't live without. It's human nature to not be grateful for what we have and to focus and be mad at God for what we don't. And that makes you a very difficult person to be around. So would love some insight on this topic. Me too. So as for the modifying, customizing genes and remove undesirable traits and conditions, man, that is just a huge issue that is going to have to be debated and fought out in philosophy classes. And that's where, so we've talked about science, we've talked about faith. That's a whole nother area of philosophy that's really kind of fallen silent. They need to argue rigorously for a philosophy of this. It's why I love the Enneagram, and our listeners are rolling their eyes. But the Enneagram comes from three sources: a philosopher, a psychiatrist, and Pontius, who is a theologian. So it's why I think the Enneagram works so well, because it addresses a philosophy of life I want to change. It addresses sin and righteousness because it's Christian. And then it addresses psychology because it's hard to change. I was listening to this one psychiatrist. He said after 35, 95% of your life is autopilot. That is terrifying. And he said, and I can prove it to you. Have you ever driven home and and forgotten how you got there for a certain amount of time? Like your body is just doing what it does, and you're not even thinking about it or a part of it. And and that's even before the Tesla. All right, you got any thoughts on that? Do you want to jump into that, or do you want to? Because you could get fired if you give your opinion. I'm not saying by me, but by your college.
No, but I mean, I just think that this is it is exactly precisely what Collins was saying, that these type of decisions, he actually says, I mean, you can have dialogue, but it shouldn't be the scientists making the final call.
Yeah,
it's got to be, and he does believe all religions need to get involved and say, this is what I believe is ethical or not ethical. You can't leave it up to the scientists.
Well, and I think a great example of that, and I told you I wouldn't bring up COVID, but with the elevation of Dr. Fauci, who is looking at everything from a scientific perspective, we needed our elected officials to make decisions. And so I think that Dr. Fauci's opinion should have been a part of that. But ultimately, I was talking with an elementary school teacher who just talked about the level of kids who can't read, write, or speak because the schools were shut down and then mask mandates, and they're realizing how important reading lips is in understanding language. So it's not just for a young child. It's not just hearing language. It's watching language. And so these kids now are 2 years. Think about this, 2 formative years behind because we were concerned about their medical safety, which I'm not saying shouldn't have been considered, but we needed everyone around the table to say, okay, there are consequences that don't just involve death. It involves, the delay of, and particularly the delay of children who were already going to struggle, because upper middle income parents with time who spend time with their kids, right? I'm going to make my kid do his homework. Kids who don't have those parents lost 2.5 years. So I think that's a great example where science needs to speak, and so, here's the percentage of people we think are going to die. That may or may not be altered by closing schools, and there was, most of the world said close. I think, was it Sweden? Sweden's the one place where they said, keep it open. And it was a difficult decision, but I think we had a lot of people who said, let the scientists make the decisions. And then there were, more conservatives who were let me make the decision. But I mean, that's what government elected officials are supposed to do, is take counsel. And I would say that's the most difficult job I have. Is we have an incredible leadership team. They don't always agree. I receive all their counsel. My wife and I actually had an interesting conversation about this. She was saying, you didn't listen to me. And what I said to her is, no, I listened to you. I made a different decision. So that's weird, right? So we have husband, wife, and then we have pastor relationship. And so, she gave me some counsel in terms of pastoring, and to be fair, she has a good record of being right. But I still have to make the decision. I can't just go with counsel. You have to receive counsel and then make the best decision you can as the leader, because I have 220 employees who count on me for a paycheck. And that weighs on me. And people always say, well, it's up to God. And I said, well, I would love for him to auto pay you directly. But as it is right now, I have to fundraise, make these decisions so that I can pay you. And I got to make the best decision I can. So I think these are tough issues, Instagram Anonymous. And I thank you for your question. All right, last question. You ready for Ashley? She said, so often, man, I hope I don't do this. So often in the message and in the debrief, Pastor Matt discusses environmentalists and the environment. I have just completed my master's in environmental science. Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate you. And I do appreciate actually environmental science. I'm not sure I'm misunderstanding Pastor Matt. Probably so, because I am so terrible at communication. But sometimes I feel like I'm doing something wrong by studying the environment. I don't worship Mother Earth or anything. Is it possible to believe in God and want to protect the environment? I would say, of course, it's possible. What do you say?
Well, yeah. I think it's even mandated.
Yeah.
I think he gave us this to take care of.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say this, Ashley, I'm sorry for doing that. What the part of environmental science I don't like is the cult-like worship of the earth. That's where I don't like the reference to Mother Earth. And I understand, when we utilize the language mother for some things, we don't always mean it literally. But Mother Earth is not in charge. But I do think we need to care about it. Plastics are a huge deal. Pollution is a huge problem. I don't know about you, but I want clean air. I want clean water. I think the myth is that religious people don't want those things. I think the issue is with what would you call it? Global warming. Again, it's we don't want the environmentalists making the decisions for the water we drink, how we drive, what we drive. There's a big push, as you know, in California for all electric vehicles by, is it 2035? Okay, let me just that's not going to happen. And let me tell you why. So they just had a town somewhere in Illinois where they said we're going to switch all of our city trucks to batteries. Those trucks will require more electricity than the entire town already. And so the city council was like, this is not possible. And so in California, we have huge issues because we don't like nuclear energy. So we don't have the ability to, remember last summer when it was like 110, Governor Newsom asked people with electric vehicles to stop driving? Well, and let me tell you why that is, because there's not enough energy to go around. And so the state population, how long have you been in California?
Since mid-'80s.
Yeah, so it's doubled in population since you've been here. We have one existing nuclear power plant left. I think when you got here, we would have had 9. We have 1. So like we're not producing power. And so when you go and you plug your electric car in, just ask your local energy supplier where that energy has come from. Most likely it's coming from fuel. So it's just hilarious. Is we need to figure something out, and wind and solar are not going to get it done. And so I think that we need to, I talked with, I went and met with a congressman, and he said, what are the 2 biggest issues facing California? And I said, a lack of energy and water. And this is a congressman. He looked at me like I said cheese, because what on the news, right? It's racial issues. It's the LGBTQ plus. And here's what I told him. I said, here's what everybody needs, whether they're gay or straight, black or white, young or old. They need clean water, and we need power because it's hot here. And he He just, well, I hadn't considered that. And it's like, because you don't actually want to deal with things that we need you to deal with. So do we need clean energy? Absolutely. Do we need clean water? Yes. I mean, I'm a surfer. I don't want to grow a third nipple the next time I go out surfing. I don't want that to happen, and all the runoff goes into the ocean. I know that. I don't want a gross ocean, but at the same time, we have to go to work. We have to be able to get around. People have to have jobs, and jobs take energy. And so that's a big challenge. You have any thoughts on that? I just pontificated.
So in my, when I teach my astronomy classes, I've done some research on this too, but I teach something about, climate change, which is the new word instead of global warming, has always been happening before we hear it will happen. If we kill ourselves off, it'll still happen for astronomical reasons. Mm-hmm. So we actually think about ice ages. Ice ages come and go, come and go. The world heats up and it cools down. And there's 3 astronomical things that are happening: the elliptical path of the Earth around the sun, the tilt of the Earth is changing, and the Earth is precessing. And all these 3.
You got to define precessing. I know what it means, but you got to
wobbling. It's wobbling, right?
So you got to dumb it down. A little bit.
So you got it. So you have the elliptical path of the Earth. Actually, I can do this again on here if you want.
Yeah, he's going to the chalkboard.
Going to the board again. All right. So can you see it? Yeah. All right. So if we make the sun, if we put the sun here is the elliptical path of the Earth. I'm exaggerating how quickly it's happening, but over about 100,000 year period, it's doing this. It's changing its shape. So that will change the temperature.
Right.
So spending sometimes further out, sometimes close, that'll change the temperature. The tilt of the Earth, if we say the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees. It tilts anywhere from like 21 to 25. It goes up and down. The tilt changes. That will make summers hotter, winters colder, and stuff like that. And then you have the precession. That will change when the season starts. So like that.
The wobbling.
Yes, the wobbling.
And that's why the summer equinoxes and the spring equinox. Summer solstice, winter solstice, spring and fall. They change. Those dates change. They're not fixed.
Well, the funny thing is,
look at that. I know some science.
We humans have decided we don't want them to change, so we do skip seconds and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah.
In reality, about 13,000 years from now, June and July, August should be cold, and November, December, January should be hot. But we're going to change the calendar so that isn't the case.
Okay.
But so we're changing the calendar. So it's possible you lost a cell phone call because the world's clock reset.
Okay.
And we actually do that. We change time because we want in the northern hemisphere, June, July, August to always be summer months. Mm-hmm. We just want that, even though if we didn't change time, now astronomers, we can't just change time, right?
Right.
So we have a thing called the Julian calendar. We do Julian dates, and they don't change. We don't have leap year, and we don't take out 2 weeks like was it King Gregory just removed from the calendar and stuff like that. So we say, hey, here's what we're going to call day 0, and we're just going to go forward. But us humans, we have changed it, so we're trying to keep it. We're keeping it so the seasons will still be the same.
Yeah, I had this guy yell at me in the lobby a couple years ago when I was talking about global warming, and I said the sun actually has the most to do with the temperature of the Earth over what we're doing on it, and he screamed at me in the was I factually correct or no?
Yeah. So in fact, I've talked to some people. I don't
think he goes to San Jose anymore.
Solar physics isn't my area of astrophysics, but I've talked to people who are in that area, and they basically say, they go, look, this was just from one physics friend of mine. Says,
well, you're my only physics.
Yeah.
friend.
He says we have like maybe 1 million years left.
Okay.
Now, most people say, well, there's 5 billion years of fuel left in the sun, but he's going like, it's heating up. In 1 million years now, it won't be livable for humans. And so he goes, should
I worry about that?
1 million years from now?
Yeah.
I think we humans can destroy ourselves before then.
Okay. All right. So I can just.
I think it'll all be over before then.
I felt like I needed to add that to my list of things to be anxious about. Did you guys feel that too? I was like, okay, I'm going to die in 1 million years.
Yeah.
Or perhaps sooner.
So, but what I teach my students is all about, it's about balance. I mean, what's sinful is gluttony, right? And just almost anything. So if we're putting a bunch of carbon dioxide up there and we're just not taking care of the planet, we're doing this, we're taking trees down, we're destroying trees, and we're polluting things, for gluttony reasons. Like, oh, we want this, we want that, we want to consume this. That's the problem.
Right. So I should get rid of my private jet.
Yeah. The greenhouse gases are not the problem. Do you know if we got rid of all the greenhouse gases on Earth that we always complain about, oh, this emits greenhouse gases. You get to drive in a special lane if you have a car that doesn't emit greenhouse gases, right? If we got rid of all the greenhouse gases on Earth, the average temperature on Earth would be about negative 23 degrees Celsius. Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, right? So this is colder than the ice cubes in your fridge. So the point is balance. The point has always been about balance. Gluttony's the problem, In other words, and then we have to have a discussion. Well, how warm do you want it to be warm? What do you want? Is it getting too warm? Because we're going to be heading into another ice age in our 20,000 years or so.
Okay. Should I worry about that?
I don't know. How many great grandchildren there at that point?
Well, I have no grandchildren because my children don't care about me.
I have no comment.
I know my daughter's in the room. She does not want to make babies. I want babies.
But I teach a balanced approach. I go there. I mean, we need to. I honestly believe in classes, if you are just plain truthful, people can handle the truth. They can handle that. Hey, the temperature on Earth is going to go up and down whether humans are here or not.
Right.
Now, can we affect that up and down? Yes. Can we prolong heated periods? Yes. Could we do the reverse? Yes. Could we make it colder longer? Yes. What we do on Earth will make differences. It's all about, we need to have a discussion on what do we want and for how long. And,
All right. Okay. Last question. We're going to wrap it up with this. Sasquatch. Real or fake? This is the most important question.
Is it good?
When I was a kid, I was really afraid of Sasquatch.
Were you?
Yes.
All right.
I grew up in Northern California.
Okay.
What do you think?
I'm going to say fake.
Okay. That hurts, but I
respect
that. I want him to be real. All right. Thank you guys for listening so much. Thank you, Dr. Buchholz. Make sure that you sign up for the class. We're going to put this in the notes, how to do that at Hunter Park with Dr. Jim Buchholz, who says Pastor Matt Brown was the most amazing science student he has ever encountered in the history of his life. So much so that he remembers a dynamic question that I asked. I'm not going to say how many years ago. Thank you for being on the show, Jim. Love you. Appreciate you. Thank you for coming to Sandals. And thank you for being a scientist who loves Jesus. So sign up for his class. Invite your friends. Connect with people at Hunter Park. Thanks for listening, Debrief audience. I love you. And I know I'm no Donna, but I did the best that I can.
Thanks for listening to the Debrief Podcast with Matt Brown. If you enjoyed this episode, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with a friend. If you would like to submit a question to Pastor Matt, you can do so at move.sc/ask. And if you would like to support the work we are doing, consider donating at donate.sc. Thank you again and have a blessed day.